Good morning, everyone. There's only two of us, unlike it says, because Dr. Stephen couldn't be with us, unfortunately. But I have on my left Kai Gate from GSK, who is Global Digital Director, and Nari Singh, who is in charge of Digital Strategy Lead at Accenture. But I also discovered this morning worked for the company that set up and launched Talking Tom. Who has children who played with Talking Tom on their phone? There we go. So maybe you can talk a bit about the success of that business. So the title of the panel is Successfully Leading Organizations Through Digital Transformation. So maybe we should start by talking about the digital transformation in your own businesses. Do you want to tell us how that happened and what's happening at GSK?
Yeah, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. It's a pleasure to be here and speak to you all. I think for GSK, we're undergoing a phenomenal transformation, especially within the pharmaceutical side with digital. We're embracing digital wholeheartedly within the organisation, and it's taking quite a big change within the business. The transformation is because our business model is changing very rapidly, and the world outside GSK has evolved hugely, and we've got to be part of that. Our consumers, our customers are evolving at a faster rate than sometimes the organisations change at. So it's really important that we move into the space more wholeheartedly. It's complex at times because there's a big organisation with lots of different dimensions to it. It's not that easy for us to coordinate, but it is a transformation that we are really getting on board with at the moment.
And was there one thing that sort of triggered the company realising it needed to do this, or has it been a sort of slow, organic process?
Having worked in this space for quite a few blue chip organisations, I've seen companies go through a digital transformation many times, and I think one of my frustrations is that they say they're embracing it wholeheartedly, and it doesn't quite embed, and it dissipates again. I think when we look at it as an organisation, our business model has externally, our world has changed so dramatically that if we're not making the transformation now, we're going to face a very different consumer. We already face a very different consumer, and if we're not adapting and supporting them, then it's going to be difficult to stay competitive at times.
Thank you. And Accenture itself, obviously you advise other companies and CEOs, but for your own company, what's the digital transformation been there?
It started a few years ago. It's still very much going on. We're a large company, so it takes time. I think when we think about digital for our clients primarily, I think when we think about digital transformations, it seems like there's only two kinds, really. The first one is a transformation that's motivated by a mindset that says somebody's coming to eat my lunch, I better react. And the second one is I could eat somebody else's lunch. And fundamentally, there's only two mindsets. And the defensive mindset is, again, I think it's a lot to do with kind of where each industry is, where each sector is. I think companies like GE, in all honesty, I think are far and few between in terms of the proactive mindset. So I think when it comes to Accenture, we formed Accenture Digital, which has about 35,000 people. So we obviously take this very seriously. We've reorganized the company around digital. It's one of our fastest growing businesses. We've actually got folks from the usual areas in terms of mobile and social and cloud. But more importantly, as importantly, I would say, we've spent a lot of time figuring out two things. Number one is how our industry is changing and some of the assumptions about industries that are changing. And a very simple example is if you're in the consumers, let's just say you're a B2C consumer industry, whether it's media, retail, or what have you, most of your consumers don't care what industry you're in. They care what the experiences are. So when I compare my banking app, I'm actually not comparing HSBC to Barclays to Lloyds. I'm comparing my banking app to Uber. So I think there is a blurring of industry boundaries that we take very seriously, because I think that's something that's happening as we see many industries at the same time. And I think the second thing that's happening a little bit for us as well is there's an entirely new species of competition in digital that many of our clients didn't have to compete with before. And those are primarily the tech companies and startups. And you could react to those very, very differently, but for many of our clients and Accenture, if you look at, if you're a retailer or a bank and you're competing with an Apple Pay or something else, or Stripe or PayPal, it's quite it's quite bizarre because the new competition, including for Accenture, we have competitors that are coming out of nowhere, play by a very different set of rules. So if you are a tech company or a startup that is at scale, you seem to have baffling valuations, right? I mean, WhatsApp last year for 19 billion is still leaving people puzzled. And you also seem to operate on a very different set of rules. So most of our clients, including Accenture, have built our success on owning assets, buildings, people, stores, branches, what have you. Many of the new competition are coming at it basically providing access, not assets. So if you think about an Airbnb that owns no fleet, owns no hotel rooms, or Uber that owns no fleet, it's really, to me, this transformation is slightly different because for the first time, what we're seeing is that the marginal cost of supply by the new competitors are near zero. So if you're a hotel chain and if you want to add another hotel, it usually costs you the price of the hotel or rooms. If you're Airbnb and you want to add another 100 rooms, the cost is near zero. And that's profoundly different, right? This is not just technology and mobile apps and social media. The economics of competition have changed. So long answer to your question, but I think so at Accenture, we're doing our own transformation, which is work in progress. But I think we're looking at it very much from a standpoint of what's happening to our clients.
Interesting. Well, there's a lot of lots to chew over in there. You talked about reorganising and you talked about embedding change. I mean, there's lots of aspects to getting those things to work in an organisation, I guess. How much is sort of the structure of the organisation important? There's also things, I guess, like culture and measurement and all sorts of other things. But to what extent do you have to turn the structure of the organisation upside down to get digital transformation to stick?
Again, having worked in various different organisations where I've been through transformation and tried to lead some of the transformation, I always say it's like a treacle sandwich. You get the top layer nice and soft, which is saying, we've got to transform. You've got your leadership, you've got your board saying, we're going to make this fundamental shift, we're going to embrace this. You've got the guys at the bottom getting enthused saying, actually, we'll make it happen, we'll do it, we'll get it going. It's a great opportunity for the business. And then you get this middle layer of treacle, which slows down the transformation because it's that change process and it's that fear process. And I've seen this in so many different organisations where you do get this resistance, and I think it's overcoming that resistance. And sometimes you've got to be a bit disruptive. Sometimes you've got to be a bit dysbuggerous and try and break things to try and make that change. Because you can make it happen, and one of the things I've learned is you can work with some really, really great people who want to affect that change. Actually, with some projects, you've got to look at picking on the right stakeholders who really want to embrace it and drive it, and almost say, those guys will help you drive this within an organisation and demonstrate the success, and then others will piggyback from that. But it's quite hard at times when you've got this viscosity of change, and it becomes very frustrating. And actually, I've been going through it recently where you're wanting to make things happen for the simple reason our environments are changing. We're being, when I look at certain areas we're working on at the moment, the external environment is putting pressure on us to change, and we've got to make this shift internally. But we're not resourced. We've not set up. We've never encountered some of the areas that we're going into, and there's that fear. And it's how you're going to overcome that. So, we're looking at upscaling, we're looking at bringing in specialists to actually help us solve some of these problems and challenges while we build capability. Because if we try and build capability and then do it, we'll be forever and the competition's overtaken us massively. So, it's being agile to the change and then looking at how you approach it in different ways.
And I guess publishers like mine have been through all the same sort of waves of how we do this. We all hired digital teams and sat them in a corner, and that meant digital was somebody else's problem, and then nobody liked that, so we integrated digital everywhere. But that meant we had all the people who had sort of legacy backgrounds in print were now responsible and doing digital, and they didn't know lots about it, and then trying to hire new people. They didn't necessarily want to come somewhere where half their job was putting a newspaper out. So I think lots of industries have been through that. When you're advising your clients, to what extent, is it just horses for courses and company by company, or are there some sort of key organisational things, having a chief digital officer, say, that you think are important?
I think with I think with the role of the Chief Digital Officer, there's two or three schools of thought that our clients seem to have. One school of thought is you need a catalyst to actually, create some traction around digital, give them some autonomy and things like that. And very often what we're seeing is the catalyst for Chief Digital Officer, or at least the public appointments, actually come from industries other than their own. If you actually look at many traditional companies, their Chief Digital Officers, in our experience, tend to not be from their own industry. The Guardian is an example where Tanya is from eBay originally, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the school of thought is there's a Chief Digital Officer that can provide a catalyst and get some stuff done. There's another school of thought, and I know that banks like Barclays think about this, which is, why would you create an artificial catalyst when digital is everybody's job? And those are, depending on the kind of passions of your leadership team, you can lean one way or the other. I think our view is, if you have a Chief Digital Officer today, that's probably a good thing. It should be a good thing. But if you have one 5 years from now, you've lost the plot.
I often say that about my own job title, which is Director of Digital Media, and I'm a bit like, yes.
I agree, because you've got the two different ways, and I've seen it in the organisations where you create the digital teams, and it is left to be somebody else's job. And the problem is that it's always pushed over the fence, and then I've seen those teams disappear again. As organisations change and they think, actually, this belongs in the marketing teams, for example. But it's never actually embedded in the marketing team, so they step back in their evolution. I was with one organisation which I watched all the great work being undone over a period of time as they removed their digital capability. And I thought, it's such a shame, because they would have been a real leader in this space. But then the way we're trying to do it at the moment is to put that more into the marketing teams, for example. And you have your digital strategy around your platforms, your technologies, etc. But more around engaging with the customers and creating those experiences should be with some of your marketing teams in conjunction with your digital strategy, your IT, your organisational structure as well. But I think it fluctuates in organisations, and whether there's chief digital officers, my role at some point should dissolve. Because I think if it's embedded within the DNA of an organisation, I should be writing kids' books or something, or travelling.
Also, I think just to build on your point, which is very often digital actually is really hard to unbundle digital from the rest of the business. Mm-hmm. So if you're actually looking at fashion, retail, you could have a Chief Digital Officer that does a fantastic job optimizing your mobile apps and websites, but if you're out of stock, it doesn't really matter how great your website is, you're kind of out of stock. And that's kind of a supply chain issue, but it shows up in digital and your NPS scores. So this artificial distinction is kind of sometimes, adverse to the idea of one company. But like I said, I think, if you have a culture where you need a catalyst, where you need an entity that, like a lightning rod, to spark change, it could be a perfectly good answer. I think the thing about the digital organizations, which baffles or kind of is a little tough for larger organizations in our experience, is that they operate with slightly different rules and metrics. So you asked about culture, you asked about metrics. And one of the things that we find is quite amazing is how digital businesses within large companies establish business cases, the request for investment and things like that. And very often, you'll see people, traditional CFOs, have a deep level of discomfort with the digital business case, because for the most part, if you're thinking about your digital strategy for 3 years, and if you have a 3-year plan, first of all, and then if you have decimal points, you're just demonstrating you have a sense of humor, because you don't know, right? And it's a different, of course you know what the upside would be, but you actually don't know how things are going to evolve. That's part of the nervousness around digital, right? It's a lot of experimentation, and it doesn't lend itself to intellectual neatness just because you have a spreadsheet. And I think the metrics that you use are also very different. So for example, if you're and I'm just giving you an example, given my background in mobile. So if you were establishing a mobile media business, the Telegraph or retail or banking or what have you, for mobile media, eventually, of course, making money is critical. But for the first 12 months, there's a completely different set of metrics that matter. In the case of mobile, actually sessions per daily active user is one of the strongest indicators of whether your app will be successful and will it make money. And if the answer is about 3, then you might have a WhatsApp. And if the answer is less than 1, then you want to relocate. But I think the idea of looking at metrics and educating the organization and the CFO that there's a different digital scoreboard that actually can prove if you get those metrics right, the money will come, is a leap of faith that's really hard to make.
I fully agree on that one, because I think, you know, we've had the discussion around, do we measure everything, or do we go with, you know, do we try things and be prepared to fail? But then you get the pressure back saying, no, you've got to measure, you've got to demonstrate you're getting the return. It's hard because where you're trying to make that leap, you've got to take some risks, and where you've got a bottom line to answer to, that's quite hard because people have a fear of failure.
So how do you get that culture into the business then, so that people aren't afraid to fail? Because you do need to try things out in digital, because one of the things that always makes me laugh is I can redraw the front page of a newspaper in 5 minutes. If I want to redesign the front page of a website, it'll take me about 6 months of user testing and browser testing and all sorts of other things. But the newspaper industry is like 150 years old, and the website industry is 10-year-old. And I guess lots of companies don't have that way of working where they're prepared to prototype and experiment and fail and just keep doing that until something works. How do you get that culture into an organisation that still has traditional targets and money to make?
It's hard. I will say that. I think it's finding those people who have that belief with you and will work with you to design that project. You know, I'm working on something at the moment which is very different to what we've done before, and it is hard to get stakeholders to buy into that. You know, I've got to take it to one of the risk boards this week, which is around, you know, getting them to buy in and say this is a big enough, you know, it's a good risk to take because there's no return on this project at all. You know, it's a nice thing to do an experiment with. But it's finding the right people who have that conviction to let you experiment and let you try. I remember years ago working in a small organisation, you know, we were going through quite a fundamental transformation as we were being taken over. And I said to the finance director at the time, I said, you know, I think we could do better by doing it purely digital, you know, trying to move some of our sales activity to purely digital. And he said, well, if you get this wrong, I will crucify you on the lawn. You know, we had a lovely statue on the front lawn, and I envisaged being tied to this thing if I got it wrong. But you know, the board took that leap of faith, and there was that pressure. But we sat down and we worked through it. We calculated as best we could, and you know, people were prepared to take that risk. But it's finding people who are brave enough.
So we never got to test whether he was being serious, but even talking like that, you're exactly, you were lucky, implies a culture of, you know, ultimately it's still about the specific thing that you recommend coming off. When you advise companies, how do you get them to embrace this idea that you need to try stuff out and fail in order to work out what to do?
I think it's you know, not heard the crucifix alternative as a career development path, but you know, for the lesser extreme, I think it's hard, but I think it's hard if you try to get permission before you show results, right? And I think the great thing about digital is that the cost of doing stuff has never been cheaper, right? I think the great thing about digital is that usually if you look at 0.1% of your customers to test something, the ability and the time to test has never been quicker. So it's hard if you go through a lot of, you know, traditional processes, because for the most part it's going to be a very big kind of leap of faith for people to give you a massive budget to build a digital organization, this and that. I think the culture stuff happens after you do something, not before. And the good news is, so for our clients, very often what we'll recommend is, you know, a series of experiments that demonstrates, you know, positive signals. And they don't have to be massive positive signals, but if you do something, this is a ridiculously small example, but you know, if you actually can show that you can use analytics for a retailer to analyze abandoned shopping carts online, which is actually the highest conversion you can get, because if somebody was going to buy something and then they got distracted, and you just literally track back the DNS and cookie addresses and do some analytics and do a promotion that says that box of chocolates is still waiting for you, but now it's 10% less. The conversion rates are absurd, like in a good way. To implement something like that is a couple of $100,000, right? So, I mean, yeah, it's not insignificant, but you don't need to wait for massive permissions from a CFO to say, did it in 90 days, you know, partnered with whoever to provide the technology, and we have what looks like a 1% increase in uplift. So I think the culture stuff, you know, proactively thinking about culture and the 8 stages of change management and stuff like that, I think those days are gone, right? It's very much show me. Because if you don't, certainly the technology industry is demonstrating that they can show things a lot quicker. That helps.
And how much of an advantage is being a sort of legacy business, one that's been around for a while with bricks and mortar, as we used to say? How much is that as an advantage? Because you've got money and you've got existing customers and you've got existing products and revenue streams. And how much is it a disadvantage because you've got existing products and you've got existing revenue streams, and that makes it hard to go off and do something new and slightly unknown, especially in the weight of competitors with zero marginal costs?
You know, I'm kind of betting my career on it because I joined Accenture a year ago with that bet. So I think it's a massive asset. Having lived in California and Silicon Valley for 20 years, you know, the one thing that we did deals with large companies when I was in the kind of operations part of my career, and one of the things we'd be amazed by is how many assets large companies never knew they had, right? And it baffled us. I mean, we would look at this and saying, you know, if we had half the distribution, the access that you have, if we had the understanding of how do you do regulation and city planning in China if you're a transportation company, if we had the understanding of your patents and your IP, GSK, I mean, I think the question if most companies would ask themselves honestly is, if somebody did not know we're a GSK or a bank or a retailer, what would they do with our assets if you were a tech company? I think the answer would be massively pleasantly surprising. So I think there's a lot. Personally, I think at Accenture, our strong belief is there's never been a better time to actually being an incumbent that can attack, not defend, attack. It's not without its challenges, though.
And how do you find that at GSK? I mean, because obviously you sell physical things ultimately to consumers. Have you been affected by sort of new digital startups to the same extent as other industries?
Well, I think, you know, we've got various different components to our business. When I look at, like, if I look at the pharma side of it, where, you know, we're dealing to the healthcare systems, you know, we've got very traditional models in that place. It's harder for digital to break into that because you've got a very established model to market. So it's quite hard to show where digital will revolutionise that. I think with organisations of any size, the challenge is when you've got legacy systems is connecting the data, the ability to see across that data and to make informed decisions out of that. To say, you know, if this is my consumer, especially with GSK, where you've got a consumer who may be buying your over-the-counter products compared to your pharma products, but at the end of the day, it's the same consumer expecting that experience. That's really hard in an organisation with legacy systems. But those are things we need to get closer to put the customer at the heart of everything. But again, I think, you know, when you look at how we can try and create those connections, I think we are at a great opportunity. There's new systems coming out. There's new, you know, our organisation is embracing the change, so we can try and drive some of this forwards. But it's still going to be a bumpy path for us, and it's not going to be a perfect road.
I think sorry, I was just going to add one thing over there. I think this is a very simple example, but I think it'll illustrate the point that we're trying to make. So a few weeks ago, we were with a large transportation company, and they had a series of digital initiatives. And one of the initiatives that they came up with through their employees, which was actually fantastic, was the idea of creating a pan-European Uber for fleet management. So apparently, about 35% of the time, if you see like a truck on a freeway or a lorry, it's half or more than half empty. Right? So it's a massive resource utilization opportunity. And this series of employees came up with this idea, a fantastic idea. And we're sitting over there, and they were presenting it because it was part of their own internal innovation. And the person that came up with this idea said, you know, here's the 5 or 6 things that we need. We need some talent. We need some people that do prototyping, app development, et cetera, et cetera. But there's 3 or 4 things that, you know, if we had, I mean, this wouldn't be just a good idea, it'd be a fantastic idea. And they were talking to the executive committee of this large transportation logistics company. And one of the things that they really wanted was toll pass data between trucks moving in Europe. Because if you can actually know that, then you actually have weighing information. If you have weighing information, you can use some analytics and things like that. And one of the guys that has been in this company for a long time, 25, 30 years, said, yeah, no, we have that. It was just like, the comment was just like, yeah, we have that. I don't know what's your point. Let's move on. And the guy who was working on our team said, just hold on to your horses. What do you mean we have that? He's like, yeah, we did this deal like in the 80s, I think, I forget, but like it's lying somewhere. We have that. So what do you need that? What do you need that for? It was a magical moment because, you know, they didn't know what they had. So it's very easy to start pointing to culture and this and that, which I'm not minimizing, but it's like you've got diamonds in your garden, right? You just need somebody else to tell you that they're diamonds, very often. So I think that to me was just, it's examples like that that I think it's a great time to be an attacker.
And you touched on people in that. What about hiring? I guess back to my earlier question, is being a sort of legacy company an advantage or a disadvantage? You've got things like pensions and buildings, and you might not have segues in Shoreditch, but you've got like real salaries. Or is it that startups have a hiring advantage, tech companies, in getting the sort of best and brightest people because they look more attractive in some ways? How do you find that at GSK, hiring people into digital roles?
I think at the moment, from our marketing teams, one of the things we've done is we've been hiring people from outside of our industry for the simple reason you need to sometimes look externally and look at best in class. And I think, we've been trying to do that. There are times where hiring within your industry is really pertinent because obviously you've got there's certain elements certain people bring to it and, that knowledge and that transfer, which is fantastic. But what I try and do is I try and look at the external environment and say, okay, what is it we're trying to do and who could help us do that? And it isn't necessarily somebody from our own pond. It's looking at somebody from a completely different sector and saying, how have they done it and done something great and brought that in? And I encourage my team to actually use that kind of knowledge. And it's not necessarily hires, it's actually just going out and meeting different kinds of people so you can share that information and share that collaboration approach. I was working with some of the telecoms people recently to look at how they've been approaching marketing and their digital transformation and try and bring that back to us as well because their mindset and the way they run campaigns and the way they interact with consumers is very different. So I want to try and bring that mindset, and it's one of the things we try and do at GSK is get outside and meet other industries to learn from those.
And you've worked for startups and advised big companies. How do you see hiring in a digital world? Who's got the advantage?
I think the conventional wisdom is startups or a Google or a Facebook or what have you. I'm not so sure I completely agree, but I think it's going to be a challenge because there's a hiring issue, but I don't think the hiring issue will solve the problem because if you have 100,000 employees, hiring isn't going to change things fast enough. So it's actually hiring and reskilling, not just hiring. But on the hiring side, we did a piece of research that said that less than 20% of millennials envision joining a large company. Envision. That's a pretty sobering fact as you think about 5-year talent management or 10-year talent management. And I think fundamentally there are certain HR processes and that don't lend themselves to attracting millennials if you believe that's an important demo for you guys to hire. But I do think that in general what large companies are finding is that if you're competing with working at a regular company, incumbent, versus a Google or a Facebook, I don't think you're necessarily today going to win that battle, necessarily. The 2 or 3 things that we found, oddly enough, is people care a lot about the mission of the company. And I think what it does, what it believes in is, especially I'm talking about the millennial generation, it's a lot more, considered to be a lot more powerful than just the compensation part of it. I think the autonomy is a big one, right? And I think if, some of the people that we, so this is a kind of a discussion we were having with various large companies as well, is a part of their recruiting process, when it got to a certain process, they required 2 or 3 weeks to sign an NDA for the candidates to disclose information, right? Nothing will terrify a candidate more quickly than that, right? And it's these small signals of intractability that I think push people off. But I think the easiest way to hire good people is to make them feel that there might be a standalone unit or some other thing that actually provides them the autonomy where they have the benefits of the mothership but none of the baggage. Right?
Great.
I think the reskilling is really important because part of our transformation is around helping people learn more about digital. I think it's one of the hardest things is where you've got a big organisation that hiring people is not going to transform things overnight. I think what you can do is you can help people on that journey, and by reskilling and working with people in groups to actually say, I can go and work with another team and help them understand. And I speak quite a lot to the markets and actually help them understand how we're trying to plan and how we're trying to evolve and then try and interact with those people. It helps them upskill. At the same time, having global training programs that support it as well that gives people the base knowledge at least to understand the opportunities that digital brings helps the organisation move forwards. Because hiring a couple of people isn't going to transform an organisation of over 100,000 people overnight. But the smaller pieces you can break off and work as an organisation to upskill that and transform that everybody together can be much more impactful.
And I think just to the reskilling point, one of the things that we found that seems to be working is this idea that we host pretty massive digital boot camps for tens of thousands of employees. And the thing about the boot camps is, of course, you would expect a little bit of digital, this and that, and this technology and that technology, and understand what the business models are, and all that happens. I think the important and slightly counterintuitive part of that agenda for the digital boot camps is how do people win in digital, and what does it mean in terms of measurement, success, speed, things like that. And I think the speed issue comes up quite often, right? So if you're reskilling employees that are used to a certain analog cadence, right? Products get released every 12 months, 24 months, much longer in certain industries where there's a lot of R&D involved. And suddenly you're talking about a release cycle of 6 weeks for a mobile app. It's like you break people's minds, right? They literally, the wheels start, I don't understand how to compute this. And that part of the training, which is, you can learn digital technologies, that's not the hard part. But a digital mindset, which is some of the experimentation, some of the risks, some of the speed, some of the stuff, that is an ongoing process. So the boot camps help, but that second part is a major opportunity for reskilling.
I completely agree, because I think we try to instill the mantra of fall forward fast and being able to let people try things, fail and move on. But it doesn't happen. It's hard for people to buy into that because we've got P&L, you've got existing processes, and that fear of failure also inhibits it. And I think you need to give people that bit of space to try things and experiment and build their capability, and that success then begins to spin out. One of the things we're trying to do is look at how we collaborate more across the business, across our different parts of the organisation, because we're a big company, but we still operate in pockets. But it's how we can expand that and share the knowledge so we don't all fail with the same mistakes, but we can iterate and learn. And then we can work with external partners and we can bring in, people with better ideas on how to engage. And I think it's that iterative process as well.
You should both try working in the newspaper industry. Every morning, 60 blank pages. You think 2-week sprints are fast. Well, thank you very much. So it's time to have questions from the floor. If you have one, do you want to put your hand in the air? If you could tell us who you are and where you're from, and somebody there will appear with a microphone.
Hi, Colin Doubleday from Value Retail. I've been involved in a variety of digital change projects, and it's interesting to hear you talk about digital leaders. I wonder whether what we need is a head of UX or a head of defined UX in every company, because I'm still finding that we have people who understand technology, we have marketers who think they understand customers, and then that whole, what is the experience where digital meets the real life? People find very hard to define even to this day.
Is your question, should we have somebody that's in charge of UX and stuff like that? So I think a few companies are trying that. Sometimes they're called chief customer officers, and that's kind of a proxy for user experience and stuff. Our view is that it's a useful construct, just like a chief digital officer, because it provides focus on something that transcends the organizational boundaries. Because user experiences include customer service, loyalty, returns, things like that, not just purchasing and stuff like that. So I think that's usually very good. I think on the user experience side, we've actually spent a lot of time on that. We actually acquired a company called Fjord, an agency that has 1,000 people, or approximately 1,000, that do nothing else but. So we take user journeys and experiences very seriously. I think the issue is, what do you compare them to? And I think very often what you'll find in value retail, as an example, or in other industries, is user experiences are being compared with other user experiences in that sector. My point about banks versus banks. Whereas if you're looking at from a user point of view, I'm comparing, or most of our experiences are being compared with mobile experiences, period, right? And that mindset shift where you're comparing yourself to traditional competitors and saying that this is a better app than somebody else's in value retail, I think that is a potential trap to avoid.
I fully agree on that, because I think when we look at the user experience, one of the things I say to my team is, if it pisses you off in real life, why are you doing it to others? You know, if you have a shopping experience that is really, really bad online, why do you want to replicate that here and take that out to market? That's awful. So one of the things is you look at everything you do and everything you interact with, and you are responsible for that user experience, and don't create one that sucks. Because that's when we sit down and think about, okay, how are we going to make sure you don't replicate that again?
Don't suck. Good advice for everyone. I think the second question was there.
Hi, Neil Borer from Harrods. So you're getting some retailers throwing some questions at you. I'm going to just dig a little deeper on that question, actually. Consistency. So you've mentioned today some really interesting ways of looking at digital transformation from a structural perspective. Within that, you've talked about digital being everyone's job, the importance of reskilling across the teams. The risk there, without some kind of centralized fulcrum, is surely inconsistency, not only from a user experience, but the back end as well. Managing customer data, having an explosion of digital across different arms of the company. So how can you embed digital into everyone, but keep control of back end and user experience consistency?
I mean, the point you raise is a great one, because I think when you look at how organisation, if you energise everybody, you're going to get people wanting to go off in all sorts of different directions and doing crazy stuff. It is having some sort of frameworks that you give the boundaries to those people to operate within. That's something that we've tried at GSK, is by developing frameworks that we can replicate across the organisation. And those frameworks try and give our teams internally some structure, because if we've got digital service teams trying to deliver out, the worst thing we could have is requests from all parts of the business for change, different layouts, different structures, especially for website deployment. It makes no sense whatsoever. It also breaks a consistent customer experience. So it's around having common frameworks that you can operate to. And I think trying to enforce those and trying to put those into the business as the standard process is critical. Not to say it's perfect and one size fits all the time. There's always going to be those exceptions, but it's easier to manage the exceptions than it is to try and manage every expectation across the business.
I think there's 2 points that I think you made. The first one is consistency around user experience and things like that. I think the second one was the divvying up between shared services between center and the branches or the hub and spokes. And I think on the first one, one of the things that we've seen work a lot is similar to what you just said, which is having almost experience guidelines or doctrines, because how an individual opco or a business unit will implement them is different. It could be different. But an example of an experience guideline could be 3 clicks to any action, right? The experience guideline could be none of your digital properties should take more than 3.6 seconds to load, right? These are just guidelines. But how you do it is besides the point, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to leave some autonomy for flexibility, because the people not at Harrods, but the people in your France office might want to customize and localize very differently, because as it turns out that you could have, to my second point, you could have a central shared service that develops mobile apps for all of your subsidiaries, and that's fine. But at some point, you're going to have the UK subsidiary that does the launch of your app in the UK customize and localize, because the way a UK app is launched in the mobile app store in Apple and Android is dramatically different than New Zealand. The marketing varies, the user acquisition costs vary, the actual promotions vary, the in-app purchases vary. So I think you have to decide that you don't want to have 18 different units creating their own mobile app studios, but at the same time, you want to leave some flexibility in terms of localization.
Yeah, I fully support that, because I think one of the, for us trying to deploy an app across multiple markets, it is quite challenging. So it's how we create the global blueprints that we can then replicate easily, but still give that amount of flexibility to the markets to localize, because there is always going to be that degree of localization. And we found that with the web. I found that with the web in another organization, which is how we blueprint our website systems so that they are easy to deploy and we can be quicker to market. I think it's really important to think about that centrally.
We don't have a one person, but the Telegraph actually has an online quality unit whose job it is to go through and rate rate the articles that we have published and mark them in accordance with like how visual they are and were they SEO'd properly and did we remember to social them. And we, we use that to go back and give the journalists training because we publish like something 15,000 articles a month and there's like 500 people doing it. And obviously it's a creative process, so it's quite hard to control it, but we do it by going around afterwards and going, you need to do more of this and less of that. I think the third question I saw was this gentleman with the beard. We've had all no ties so far. We can tell it's a digital conference.
Hi, Alan Bader at McDonald's. There was a great discussion before about metrics and how tech companies often have a different approach to metrics. And in my experience, it's one of the ways you can, unify that treacle sandwich between what's at the top and the middle and the bottom. I'm curious to ask, what sort of metrics do you find that an organisation as a whole can all embrace around digital?
I'll start. I think it varies depending on the kind of business you're in. I think broadly speaking, and I'm oversimplifying life a little, but if you're in the consumer space, consumer-centric business, I think in digital, these are broad statements and the devil is in the details, but I think in general, what digital has shown on the consumer side is that the most important metric is engagement and distribution. And oddly enough, monetization is the easier problem. And you've got 10 years of history now, that you didn't have before that demonstrates if you follow the track of an Instacart or a LinkedIn or an Instagram or a WhatsApp or a whatever, Google, you'll see the same trend. The most important first metric is distribution and engagement, 2 metrics. Because I think at the end of the day, if you have, and so, we jokingly kind of call it, the premature monetization syndrome. Right? If you try to monetize too quickly, you will kill the golden goose. And the trick is actually knowing when to pivot. Right? When do you have a critical mass? So, for example, in the mobile space, this is about 3 months ago, but if you actually look at the mobile space and analyze all the numbers in terms of what it takes to be in what app store ranking and how much revenue people make in terms of the first 50 or 100 apps, it's usually the case in our experience that about 25 million monthly active users or 100 million downloads is the tipping point at which you can start charging money. Right? It's usually a good tipping point. So there's these rules that you learn on the way to the farm by actually having done it. So I think that's one. So I don't know if that answers your question in terms of on the consumer side. On the B2B side, it varies. I mean, how GE measures digital success and things like that would be very different than just consumer traction.
I mean, what we're trying to do at the moment with some groups is look at metrics around reach, acquisition, conversion, engagement, and then within those containers is work out what the actual metrics are for those, because we're trying to look at those conversion paths in there. And again, whether it's an app or whether it's a website or whatever we're trying to do, is try and have some frameworks around how we're measuring and looking at our effectiveness, and then hopefully our distribution in there as well. So it varies depending on what you're doing.
Yeah. The other metric which might be interesting is, I'm emotional about this one, I get choked up. The other metric would be how you manage risk, right? So the only thing you know is if you try 10 things in digital, three should fail or 4 should fail, otherwise the target's too close by. How do you measure that? That's an interesting one. I don't have an answer to that one. But actually training the organization to actually measure digital as a portfolio, as a mutual fund manager, as opposed to these stage gate mega big initiatives from 3 years with decimal points and committees and things like that. That to me is a really interesting one, because the only thing you know for sure is if you're doing digital right is there's a certain live to death ratio, right? I don't know what the right answer for that one is.
Great. Question at the back there, if you can just wait for the microphone.
I think this will be the last question.
This will indeed be the last question.
Spiggy from Gang of Four. You talked about asset light and intangible values. Does that mean that we need to change the accountancy approach in terms of getting CFOs more on board? And the second question, given the millennial one, are freelancers the future?
Sort of Uber for employees, if you will. Well, so you touched on CFOs earlier. Do they need re-education?
I believe so. I mean, I don't think it's a massive shift in terms of where people end up, which is actual tangible value and EBITDA and returns and profit to shareholders. I think the starting point is different. So I think the education is not like there's a brand new set of metrics for, for measuring the success of a company. It's still going to be very traditional. I think the journey and the transition points for the first 12 to 18 months are the most important ones. So I think the education is not in terms of a new form of accounting or a new, scorecard. I think it's just basically understanding that the life cycle of a digital business, and in this case, consumer digital business, actually has very different metrics of traction and engagement by virtue of how hyper-connected networks work. So I don't think it's as extreme as that. In terms of freelancers, yeah.
I think it depends on the opportunity, doesn't it? It's bringing in the right talent for the right role. So I think, we use freelancers all the time. So I don't think we'll change our model.
Well, thank you very much. That's been fascinating. I think we've gone 45 minutes without anyone saying big data. So you can probably discuss that later in the day. Thank you very much to the two people on the panel.